Hello everybody, welcome to this week's bonus podcast where we are going to be talking about the Corrie Summer of Comedy 2005. And yes, I am putting comedy in inverted commas here because that seems to be the name that's been given to it by fans of the show who don't really look too fondly back on that era. So we're going to be chatting a little bit about what it was like, what the storylines were going on about it. Was it funny? Was it not funny at all? And just kind of playing it out from there. Now, I've been watching this. Gemma hasn't. Gemma's still here. You're going to play a really important role, aren't you?
Yep.
What are you going to be doing?
Asking questions.
Gemma's been briefed to ask me questions, otherwise it's just going to be me talking. But Gemma does not watch the classic Coronation Street. I don't blame her. She's too busy with other stuff. I'm not. I seem to just have an infinite amount of time for whatever I fancy. But even I've not been watching it. I mostly listen to it in the shower. So I've got a partial understanding of what went on in the classic Corrie Summer of Comedy 2005. But I've probably only seen about half of it. I just thought it would be interesting.
Heard all of it.
I've heard all of it, at least. I just thought it would be an interesting idea, and I've known this has been coming for a while, to take a look back at an era of the show that really is not looked too fondly on, watch it for the first time in, 19 years, and say, was it that bad after all? The answer is going to come up soon. So, had you heard of this era beforehand?
No. No, I hadn't.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I thought, and I was completely wrong in this. I think that it had been sort of marketed by ITV as a summer of comedy for Coronation Street, but I can't find any evidence to that, and I think it just seems to be some kind of construct that the viewers came up with on forums to christen this this era of Corrie.
Well, this would have been a long time after the fact then, wouldn't it? Because forums didn't exist.
No, yeah, they did. You can go and see the Digital Spy forum.
Really?
From 2005, from earlier.
Oh yeah, I suppose
Internet's
so.
been around a long time now. We're just like really old.
So when was
this
this
point.
again? What
this
era?
was 2005.
Oh, 2005.
Summer 2005.
Yeah.
So there were definitely forums there.
in
We
my
were out
mind,
of university at that point.
As somebody who doesn't watch classic Corrie, it's still like in the 90s.
No, we are past. In fact, this is the summer that I graduated university. We're talking to here,
so
just about to start my teacher training.
Oh, I see. This is why I didn't watch it.
Yeah, you didn't need to. I wasn't around. No,
Where were we?
I was just back living with my parents, and you were living with your parents.
Yeah.
I think for that little bit. So
where did you go teacher training?
Here.
Southampton?
Yeah.
Then you came back though, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I just got away from you for a few months,
for a little
and
bit.
you had a little break for Coronation Street. So you've still never seen this.
No,
but
that's really funny.
Looking back on the forums from the time, it seems that people did not enjoy this era at the time, and it wasn't too long before the posts started appearing, talking about the summer of comedy and what a disaster that was.
Can you just be clear about what this summer, how long of a summer are we talking?
Well, I mean, I don't know how long it is. I'm going to be talking today with you about like June to August sort of time. We're just in September at the moment on ITV3 as we're recording this.
Do you feel there's a marked difference? Are you like, phew, now it's so much more serious?
Not quite yet. I'm sure that the final chuckles will still linger for a few more weeks, if there are any chuckles at all, that is. But I think looking at it, it did feel a little bit more different to what came before it. People at the time... Oh, go on.
I've got one question.
Oh, I hope you got more than that later. Yeah.
Was it funny?
Bits of it were.
Would you have thought afterwards that was Corrie's comedy summer?
I think so. I think it felt like their attempted comedy summer, because there were certainly an awful lot of storylines in it that were kind of fluff, that weren't particularly character or plot development. They felt a bit filler. And, we've been watching Corrie for so long, you can tell when a comedy storyline is coming up. Brian's reconnected with his Italian cousin.
Yeah.
That's a comedy storyline.
Okay, right. And another question I have for you is, what was going on in Coronation Street behind the scenes that would make everyone think that this was kind of like... This feels a bit like a foot off the accelerator kind of a summer, right? Where they were like, okay, we need to buy ourselves some time here, or everything's really too much. Because the thing about this, I don't know what they were doing in the early 2000s as far as production goes, but now, the scripts are written like the stories have come out a year before, scripts probably 6 months, and then they film like 2 months. So it's not like they were going, we want the summer off, so we're going to make it this comedic, because this was filmed much before they...
Filming back then was probably still only about 3-4 weeks beforehand, I think. Not like the 8 that
But it's not like they were getting time off work because they were passing about.
No, I don't think so. I mean, the producer at the time was Tony Wood. He was producer from March 2004 to February 2006. So he was consistent all the way through. But they didn't have an executive producer at this time. I know. So Carolyn Reynolds had been the executive producer until about mid-May or so, and after that, it was in 2006 that Kieran Roberts took over. So I don't know whether there was a bit of there's nobody else steering the ship from on high, as there had been up until this point. But even, in the past few years, we've not had an executive producer as such. So
I would love to know really how much creative vision an executive producer gives, because...
Yeah, I would say it's more the producer's job.
Yeah,
which
so
means
it shouldn't really make much difference.
It shouldn't make much difference if Tony Wood was a producer all that time. But I mean, Corrie had been doing really, really well. It was in a bit of a golden era, especially 2003. We'd had the Richard Hillman story, which is Corrie's biggest, most explosive, dramatic, and well lauded storyline for a long time. And I do remember 20 years ago, enjoying Coronation Street and thinking, every episode here is gold. This is brilliant. Because there were always, peaks and troughs when you watch Coronation Street. But I was, even back then, thinking, this is still good. When's it gonna have a dip? And just before this summer of comedy, I suppose the main storyline that had been taking up a lot of screen time was the Killer Katy one. So we talked to... Lucy Jo Hudson on the podcast a few months ago, so that was when the Killer Katy story ended on ITV3, and that was very heavy, that was very dark, although only for a few months, I guess, because it was all about the relationship between Katy and Martin beforehand, and it was the time between Katy killing Tommy and then the Harrises all being shipped off to Sheffield or prison or wherever. The graveyard wasn't too long, but that was the big one that was working up for, and I wonder whether this was in some way let's just have a breather, let's get a bit of light-hearted stuff in there because it's feeling a bit dark.
Right, yeah.
I mean, they'd also...
What other stuff had happened?
We'd had Ray Langton had come back, so he died. He died, exactly. So he returned
and died.
No, he did not. He might have broken wind. I don't know.
Nobody was there.
No,
nobody heard it.
No, yeah. If nobody's
there,
was
sitting next to it. Yeah,
that's
if
a philosophical
man breaks
question.
Wind in
Before
the
he
Rovers, does it, and no one hears it? Does it smell?
Good point.
Don't know.
Well, Tracy came back and she sat down next to him, and so she lingered.
Go,
so.
Whoa, what's that smell? Oh, Dad, what's...
the stench of death.
Oh, no.
That was one of the funny things that was just in it recently, actually. I can't remember whether you remember the scene where Blanche and some of the others, and Norris, I think it was, found Rita in her flat and they thought that she was dead. You heard of or seen that scene? And she's there, like, completely passed out, arm flopping down the side of the sofa. She was just like... I don't think this was the carbon monoxide story, but maybe it was. I can't remember now. If it's been revealed in the following episodes, I haven't caught up with that yet. But yeah, that was hilarious. And I think that was... I can't remember whether that was a Darren Little sketch, maybe. Sketch, right? It's some of what happened in Corrie at that time did come across a little bit as sketches, and Blanche is there saying, "Oh, no wonder you couldn't feel the pulse underneath all that makeup," and that was funny. And as she was going towards her, she was like, "The stench of death." Anyway, I digress. So we had Ray Langton, and I kind of enjoyed that storyline, not too much. I think I probably appreciated it a little bit more in this second rewatch because we'd obviously seen a lot more of the vintage Coronation Street with early Ray Langton in, but it was okay. It was all right. There'd been Sally Webster's affair with Ian Davenport, which again I didn't really enjoy at the time. I think, and I don't enjoy affair storylines at the best of times really, but I think even back then when I was only however old I was, 23, 24, that really wasn't the thing for me. Sally I'd kind of enjoyed over the previous few years being the pushy stage mum, and that was kind of shunted to one side for this Ian Davenport story. He wasn't that engaging a character for me. I suppose I enjoyed it a little bit more this time, but it was feeling either a bit dark or a bit dry, apart from Mel Hutchwright coming along, which was oh my gosh, what's the actor's name? He completely dropped out of my head.
Sir
Gandalf, you know.
Ian
McKellen. So he came in, and I think that was about May time, and he was only in it for 10 episodes. I was quite surprised when I was just having a quick look on Corriepedia before recording this episode, because even watching it on the rewatch, it felt like he was in it for a lot longer. But no, it was, you know, a few weeks and it was gone. And I think I enjoyed it at the time. Again, back then I didn't particularly appreciate who Sir Ian McKellen was necessarily. I was never into the Lord of the Rings films, and being able to watch it again, and the relationships between him and Norris and Emily. Obviously, I've got a much greater appreciation for Emily now, having watched some of her old stuff. That really was fantastic. I thought it was funny, and Mel Hutchwright, or Lionel Hipkiss, as he was revealed to be, was a really fun villain, and he was just. The dialogue that was written for him, so much of it was so theatrical and Shakespearean, and he was a really kind of very bitter and sarcastic man that would come out. But that was kind of fun. I don't know whether that counts as part of the Corrie summer of comedy or not, because it was May.
It's a couple of months before the period you're kind of talking about.
Yeah.
And if you're saying that this was...
And that was really, really gold. That was fab.
Is this maligned period, then it wouldn't really count, would it?
No, not necessarily. I mean, not necessarily everybody enjoyed that story. But yeah, it was in the months after that a lot of the heavy stories stopped, apart from really the heavy stories that were left was like Stephen Tracy's custody battle for Amy, and that's still going. And it was okay. There was a story of like Steve pretending that he'd fallen in love with Tracy again so that he could convince her to put his name on the birth certificate, because it had been Roy up until that point. She clocks what he's doing, pulls back, and then she tricks him into like taking Amy to the airport, and then she makes out to the police that he's absconding with Amy. So it was all right. I mean, Steve and Tracy are solid characters, but it wasn't the most exciting thing. But then the Shelley story with Charlie, that has been what's really kept me gripped in the past, month, 2 months or so.
That's going on all the time.
Yeah, that's been constant all the way through this. That's been going, for months. That was a long stander.
So what were people really moaning about when they were saying about what it was that they didn't like about this? Then what
for the comedy? It was, they're kind of saying it was a bit panto comedy, just a bit too little story of the week kind of thing, filler, characters that were in it. I mean, a lot of characters get brought up that are very strongly linked to this particular period in Corrie's history, which I'm sure we'll get to. And just okay. It's getting into maybe a bit OTT as well, and some characters, getting up to things that maybe are stretching credulity. There was one story a bit like that. I mean, there were two big Fred and Ashley stories that went on over the period. One of them, again, was a little bit before the June story, and that was when Fred fell into a hole in the back of Audrey's garden and discovers a little stream underneath there. Now, we've talked about this because we did the John Savardant retrospective earlier on this year, but it was that had completely dropped out of my head. I think quite a lot of the stories that played out over the summer, I didn't have very much memory of watching them. I know I must have watched them. I couldn't tell you, I know exactly what's going to happen next. This water story, the only reason that I knew about it is because we talked about it with Fred. It was quite funny. He falls into a hole in the bottom of Audrey's garden. He then decides that the water that he's fallen into is from St. Weather's Well or something, which is some fantastical, legendary underground spring that I think Roy finds out about or has heard about in his books in the library or on a map or what have you. And Fred decides that it's some pure elixir of life and decides to start selling it. And then he gets into a battle with Audrey, who says, oh no, this is on my land. You shouldn't have anything to do with this. It was a little bit silly. And then the punchline at the end of it is basically sewage. I didn't mind it because I really do enjoy the characters of Fred and Audrey, but I think I would say that was possibly the beginning of the end, or the dip.
So that the beginning of the end?
Well, the beginning of the end of the golden era that I was talking about earlier. I mean, you can look at the viewing figures from around this time and see that the summer was definitely down. I mean, it was still,
think
11 million or so. I mean, it's huge compared to now, but summers are always down.
Yeah, I mean, counterintuitively to me, but if you're in an entertainment business, you know that summer is crap for everything. Books, games, magazines, TV, everything goes down over summer, which is weird because you think people would have more time. But no, they want to spend it with their family.
Yeah, going outside.
What I literally don't understand.
I mean, the viewing figures had started a steady decline by that point. Even in 2005, the ratings were about 1 million down from the previous year. They didn't go back up again. I mean, there was the odd little spike here and there, but on the whole, this was the beginning of the downward trend that we are still, 19 years away from it, still in.
Yeah, I see.
I was looking at the Digital Spy posts about it, just seeing what people thought about it. There was one that I found that was from the end of 2005. There was every couple of years a post will appear saying "Summer of Comedy," and then it's just full of people slagging off the era. So, but also theorising about why did it happen, and some of the theories that have come along were that it was filler because certain stories might have been scrapped, right? And I don't know how much truth there is in this. There's no evidence. It's all very much supposition. But there were 2 stories that were earmarked for 2005 that would have, I guess, been quite dramatic, edge of your seat ones that never happened. And one of them was to do with Mad Maya, and one of them was to do with Martin. Now, the Martin one...
know about the Martin
we know about, because 2005 was the year that the character left the programme. I think it was November sort of time. But we've spoken about this openly many times. He'd been asked to do a story where Martin would fall in love with another young girl, but this time she would be below the age of consent. So it was basically going down a very dodgy area.
Long affair with Katy that culminated in the death of half her family.
Yeah.
And he still, never faced justice for this. So that's one of my personal feelings about why I hate Martin. But so then to go from that to, because I always thought it was gross that he had this relationship with a girl who was in school. But the age of consent in this country is 16, so legally he was
it
allowed.
is what it is.
I think it shouldn't be. I think there should be questions about it. But so he's conducting a legal relationship with somebody who's in school who is 16. I mean, that's really gross. Sorry, but it is. He's a dad. And
a dad to somebody who is not much younger than that.
I know. So from that, they never made a big fuss about how gross this was, except for the dad of Katy, I forgot his name.
Martin. Oh no, Tommy. Sorry,
Tommy, who was kind of an arsehole. So people really didn't. I don't think were that sympathetic because he was not very good at articulating himself in a reasonable way. So he came across as like also a bit of a villain because he was so cruel to Katy about it. So Martin kind of got off scot-free here, but I think that the actor Sean Wilson was correct in saying that were they to make Martin into what is legally a paedophile, it would have reflected very poorly on his character, but also it would have made him into a predator because the fact that he was going out with Katy, if you want to hand wave it, you can, even though it's gross and I think you're a bit weird.
Yeah.
It's not illegal, so what can you do about it? If you start going younger than that...
Yeah, I found an interview with him from 20 odd years ago, and he said that there wasn't a major fallout at all over the Katy plot. He says, although they were thinking of a different story with a younger girl, and I told them I didn't want to do it, that was a step too far for me. I don't know whether it was a case of Katy was going to again move on to this other girl, or whether the original...
Katy?
No. That after Katy, Martin would then move on to a younger girl, or whether it was a case of they're originally going to have him dating an underage girl, and he was like, no. And then they said, okay, how about Katie Harris then? And he went for this.
Why were they so intent on making him
I don't know.
a pedo? It's gross. What the hell was going on?
I don't know. I do feel bad for him.
This is the thing. I know that there have been a few cases and I'm not really sure how true they are or how publicised they are about other people being asked to do very controversial things that they wouldn't refuse to do.
Mm.
So he's not the only person who's been asked to be part of a controversial storyline. But,
No.
you know, has there ever been someone like this in this soap?
What?
A pedo?
There, maybe. I don't think one who was, it would have been very dodgy territory to have had a character who was, a goodie. You can say up until that point. I know that we have our issues with Martin, but he was in no way a villain up until this point.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it seems like a really stupid idea. Sean Wilson, I think, was right in this case to say, like, number one, I don't want to do this. I'm going to be the face of paedophilia in Coronation Street. And number two, what are you doing with this character? Because I don't think you get to be the age that Martin is and suddenly start doing what he was doing. I think, I don't really, I'm what's the word? Blissfully ignorant of the inside thoughts of what you get up to when you're that kind of person.
Well, when he left originally, again in these interviews, he said, I was told we want to give the character a rest. I was told that the writers needed oxygen in the character to let him breathe, and that my character was emotionally pushed into a corner. That's a long-winded way of telling me they'd had enough of me. I could take the hint and told them I understood. So he was axed in spring 2005, and he kept on going for November.
He wasn't axed, was he? He left.
No. He was told we want to give the character a rest.
He said what? I'm going. Well, that's not being axed then.
No, I think that I can't find out. Understandably, it's not necessarily all out there exactly what happened, but that he said that he was told that the character had run its course, but whether or not they said that after he, caused trouble in inverted commas.
I'm confused because nowadays when you say to an actor, we want to give this character a rest, they say, that's just normal for this show. You spend 6 months doing nothing.
Yeah, no, not that.
You would have done that back in 2005, I guess, if you had been a big name character like Martin and you hadn't been in the show for months on end.
So anyway, this is a very long-winded way of saying possibly Martin was going to have this other story in summer 2005, and in the long-term planning meetings they'd planned that, and then suddenly they didn't have Martin anymore. He refused to do it, so they couldn't do that. This is really
a rumour, isn't it?
This is totally a rumour. This is it's theory. I've seen a few people having this theory.
That one of the reasons why 2005 was the summer of comedy was because they had nothing on their plate
after this gaping hole that the Martin storyline and the Maya storyline.
Right, so what was the Maya storyline?
Well, we know that she got killed. No, she didn't get killed off.
Excuse me.
She got crashed into by a lorry.
She's still fine
in her car back the previous year, and we've not seen her since.
No.
And so it's still kind of up in the air about how she is. I don't know whether she's been mentioned at all. But they were apparently going to then have in 2005 the trial, the Maya trial. And I don't know when that was going to be, but there was an article that I found from mid-December 2004 that was saying that's been scrapped because, and maybe we don't want to go too much into detail about this, Jimmy Harkishan had to take some breaks from the show because of some issues in his personal life. And that story could not take place because Jimmy wouldn't be in it. He was recovering, shall we say.
Okay.
And his number of character appearances plummeted after that. He'd been getting 112, 129, 133 appearances in the years before, and then in 2005 that shot down to 63, and it's with the odd exception, it's kind of been mid-60s to 70s since. So I think I certainly felt watching the classic episodes that Dev really did feature heavily for quite a while, but after this period, we've not seen too much of him. And it's maybe only in the last few years that we've seen a bit of a resurgence of him, isn't it? Because when now he's been the embarrassing dad sort of character.
Renaissance.
Yeah, exactly, the a la Renaissance. So that's the other one. Maybe if the Martin story had taken place as planned, if it was planned even for that time, if the Maya story had taken place as planned, we wouldn't have had to have shoved in these extra comedy filler storylines, which are fine every now and then. Although I don't know, I'm struggling to think of one that they've had this year. I mean, some people may say that the Institute story falls into that category.
It doesn't count if it's unintentionally funny.
No, exactly. And
it also still counts if it's unintentionally unfunny.
Yes.
As a comedic attempt.
Yeah, it is funny because like you one of the things that people always say about Coronation Street is, oh, I like the gentle northern humour. So I wonder what's the difference between that and a comedy storyline.
Fans are always critiquing Coronation Street and saying, I wish it was like the old days, and one of the hallmarks of the old days was that it was funnier. Now, I'm going to say that I genuinely think that, having watched a few episodes of every era now, I do think that the comedy in the old days came from the wit and the banter of how people interacted with each other, rather than situations. Like, there were a few funny situations, like, oh no, Jack, there's sea lions in the bath, and things like that, and like, I want to be a wrestling talent agent, and all that kind of stuff.
And Mavis and Derek jilted each other. What are the chances?
But on the whole, it was funny and it was lighthearted, but it wasn't because, Annie Walker fell on her ass in front of everybody and smashed a plate on the floor.
Yeah, but she did fall into that hole outside the Rovers that one time, didn't she? And that was I think that was unintendedly hilarious.
Right, I know, but you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
And also, I've decided that we're going to have a naming, a new naming system.
What's this?
So, vintage Corrie is 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. Classic is 80s and 90s.
Right.
Modern is 2000 to 2020. And current is current.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah, that's fine by me.
I think everybody needs to adopt
Are we going to roll that out now?
My new...
But when does it start...
I think it's easier to... Because I think that...
When does it stop being retro?
Oh, we can work retro in once we get another 20 years. And then, because we're going to need another 20-year one, aren't we? We can't have modern... being next
When's postmodern Coronation Street?
You just mind your own business.
Maybe we're in that now with all the flashbacks and weird editing techniques and CGI fireworks. That's postmodern Coronation Street. Well, I was saying before, and I think we maybe now we're getting on to what actually happened in the summer of 2005, half an hour into the episode, we maybe kind of base it around these characters, because quite a lot of the names that were in the forefront of the show were there because of their perceived comedy value. One name that gets thrown out there, and I think is somewhat unfairly too closely linked to this when they didn't actually appear very much, is Diggory Compton. So this was Molly's dad. He was the baker. He didn't have too many episodes in total. He lasted 2 years? I can't remember. He was like big.
He was like the butcher.
Big glasses. Eric Potts played him.
He was a comedy character that was kind of the mirror of John Savardin's character, Fred Elliott. Yeah. So he was the butcher and he was the baker.
Yeah.
So they were similar in that they were both buffoonish, portly men who.
Yeah, but I think you're right. But I think that Diggory came across as being a bit too obnoxious.
Yeah, he wasn't likable. He was like the evil twin.
Yeah, he was still supposed to be funny, but he
laughed at him.
Yeah, but also when he like joined the street, he'd be like purposefully trying to steal customers away from Dev or Fred or the characters that we love, or the Rovers, like going in there with his flowered baps trying to tempt people away. And it's like, hang on a minute, what are you doing muscling in on our turf? And that was exactly what the characters at the time were saying to him, and they were all a bit annoyed by him. I think the viewers were a bit annoyed by him, and with the big milk bottle glasses and his rotund stature, he was purposely put there as a bit of an oddball. He was 100% a caricaturish character, but they just didn't really have all of the right writing for him. Now, Eric Potts is he's a comedy performer. He's sort of big on the panto circuits, isn't he? We saw him in panto a few years ago, but the character just didn't particularly work. But as I said, he didn't appear too much in the summer of 2005. He was only in it for about 4 or 5 episodes in the course of June, July, August. But because that era, you get lots of characters that are thrown in at that point, or we got characters like Jesse and Joanne Jackson, the twins at the factories. There's quite a few that he so strongly linked to that time. He, I think, unfairly gets caught up in the whole summer of 2005.
Makes sense.
And in fact, the one scene that I particularly remember that took place over the summer, I kind of enjoyed, and this was as part of Ashley and Fred's boxing storyline, where at the beginning, Fred was the one who was supposed to be squaring off against Maddox, the dad.
Mad Dog.
No, Mad Dog was the son.
Oh damn.
The dad was the one who was going up against Fred first, and then there's a scene where Fred and Diggory having a sparring match, like a practice box in the garden of number number 4. And Diggory knocks Fred out cold with one punch, and he's there, and he's got his string vest on. He looked like somebody straight off the front of a Blackpool postcard, sort of really sweaty and just icky kind of looking. But I found it kind of funny. But yeah, after that we didn't see a whole lot of that character. I think we're going to start to see a bit more of him now because Molly has just arrived on the show, so I guess there's going to be more of the relationship building between those two. But yeah, Jesse and Joanne Jackson, again, characters that came in, stayed around for a few years, buggered off again, and didn't really do much. Now, what would you say, because you did watch some of them, from a complete no preparation, what was your memories of those two?
Looking gormless in the factory.
Yeah, and it didn't really go much further than that.
Oh.
They were that wasn't a trick question. That was basically it. They were brought in as factory extras. They were characters who were supposed to be twins, but then it later turned out actually they were cousins. And they were a bit of a one-trick pony of, hey, we're twins. We talk to each other. We talk and say the same thing at the same time. Proper sister kind of stuff. But they didn't really, I think, add anything to the show. You got one. I can't even remember which one's which. Is Jessie the thin one? I don't even remember. That's how unmemorable they were as the characters. Or is that maybe that is Joanne?
When you have the joke,
one of them ended...
is that one of them's fat and one of them's thin, and they're twins, and isn't it funny? But they're not really twins, and that's the joke. You've limited yourself right off the bat. You know? And
that's basically all they were. I mean, the factory at the time, it did have a bit of a history of characters that were brought in just to be factory extras, but they were a bit trumped up. So you had, like, Sonia, you had Bobby Lewis. I mean, even from back in the 70s, you had Ida Clough, who wasn't anything other than just somebody that Ivy and Vera worked with at the factory, but she was still a proper character, wasn't she?
She was a vintage character.
She was a vintage character, exactly. And so maybe just having, Jessie and Joanne on their own is just in the tradition of Corrie factory extras, which we don't have these days. Everybody who's in the factory, Izzy maybe doesn't do a whole lot, but I still count her as a main regular character. There isn't anyone there who just turns up at the factory and then we don't see him again, is there?
No, that was why the joke worked so well with Tupele Dorgie's character.
Kelly,
yeah. Where she was like, yeah, I've been in the factory this whole time, I'm going now. And that was her first episode. Yeah,
exactly. She's kind of straddles the line of, is she the glorified factory extra or is she a main character? Because she was in the show for 2, 3, 4 years. I lose track. But she didn't have huge number of storylines.
No.
But I think the fact that she went out with Lloyd for a while, that kind of upgraded her to being more of a regular.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The thing is about nowadays is that there's like some proper classic characters that have been in it for yonks. And then there are a bunch of characters who seem to be there just for a storyline for like a year or so. And then there's a load of people who really back in the old days would have just been a peripheral character. But because of the way Corrie works now, sometimes they're thrust into the limelight, for a story and then they bugger off again. You know what I mean? It's all very weird now. It's all a bit nebulous, and you can be somebody who's been in the show for, 20 years and be in no stories in a whole year. That's weird.
It is. I know. But yeah, so those twins, they really did offer very, very little to Coronation Street. So I've got some fond memories of them, but they were pushed to the front in that summer. There was one story where Candice went for a modelling audition for something, Candice Stowe, and they just seemed to come along and strut about on the catwalk with her just because. I don't think it was that much more than that. Another character who was in the forefront for quite a while, and maybe this also shows why that summer was not a golden era, was Scooter.
Scooter Makuna.
Yeah. Although apparently, because I watched the episode where he goes to court, and his actual surname was pronounced something like Mahuana or something. So I don't know whether he was actually Scooter Mahuana, or whether he called himself Makuna.
I thought he was called Scooter Makuna because it
kind of sounds nice.
Hakuna Matata.
I don't think so. I don't know whether there's just a bit of lovely assonance.
I literally did not watch this, so he was only in 50 episodes that year, or in total.
Yeah, that was it. He arrived in January. He was gone by November, so he was Sarah's dull boyfriend. And I think
I feel better about what I don't know who the hell this guy is really.
You didn't see a whole lot of him, but he's
more of a legend to me.
He's kind of legendary. And the idea of him being... What makes him funny is that he's so dull, that's funny.
He's got a funnier name than he had personality.
Yeah.
Like, he had no business being called Scooter Makuna. He should have been called, like, Jeff or Bob.
Oh, Jeff, he was, classic Corrie villain. But yeah, I get your point that you're
Jeff
trying to
is not a good name, though, is it? I'm sorry if you're a Jeff.
Sorry, Jeff.
You're not like... It's not like the Razzle Dazzle Jeff.
It's pretty good if you're a talking mongoose.
No, but he was spelled with a G. E-F.
So he sometimes, very occasionally, like once in a blue moon, gets a reference. He did a few months ago, didn't he? When David's like, do you remember Scooter?
Only because everybody likes to say his name.
The character was a joke, but that doesn't make for comedic viewing. But I did actually find rewatching his big story that took place over the summer of 2005 kind of interesting, because it literally just felt new. It was almost as if I had not seen this before. I had no memory of what was going to happen.
So what did he get up to then? What was the point of
He
this
stole
character?
some koi carp from a lady's pond. See, the Scooter, again, I suppose he's got a funny name. He's dull, he's funny, but he also drives skips about, and his thing when he first started in the beginning of 2005 is that he'd keep going on about all this treasure that he'd find in a skip, and like, oh Sarah, I've got you this doll's house for Bethany, found it out of a skip, it's great, and Sarah would kind of give him, oh really, looks, and wherever Scooter went, people would look around him with like a, oh really, and that was the joke.
I get that sometimes, but it's just me.
Yeah.
I don't mean for people to be weird. I just am.
You're hilarious, Gemma. Don't worry about it. You're funnier than Scooter. So he basically, in the summer of 2005, moves into number 8 on a trial basis. So, move into number 8. You've been upgraded as a bit of a main character, and you're not
Which
just
one's
somebody.
Number 8?
The Platt's house.
Okay, I don't know. You always say it, and I remember. But
it's all right. I got a few more years on you. It took me a little while to learn it as well. So.
Number 8.
The fish saga.
Why has he moved there for?
Because he's Sarah's boyfriend.
That doesn't mean anything.
He's moved in. He's, they're getting serious.
Okay.
I didn't particularly, in some ways.
They should have charged him rent. It wouldn't be in the problem they're in now.
If you look at the story, if you look at the boyfriends that Sarah has had since, bit of stability with Scooter, not necessarily a bad thing.
That's why she ran screaming.
He's not a drug dealer. He's not a gangster.
That's why she didn't last 5 minutes.
He's not Carrie Winterhouse. But he was just a skip driver. Well, one thing that was good about this is that it allowed David to shine, because he's got, how old is he at this time? 14, 15? And we are 100% seeing sarky, dry humour David just sitting there at the dinner table where Scooter's going on about skips, and the looks David gives. So Jack P. Shepherd, absolutely brilliant in this era, and just like, I can't believe that my older sister is going out with such a loser as this. And then that's great catalyst for Sarah to start having a fight with him and going, oh David, shut up about it. And I do love Sarah and David bickering, and they still do it sometimes now, don't they?
Yeah.
So the fish saga basically was that he was delivering his skip to a woman one day, and she's this kind of posh woman who's also a little bit racist, it seems like, because he comes to the door and she's a bit of a hyacinth bouquet type, and she's kind of like, oh my gosh, yes, take the skip round the back, go away, I don't want anything to do with you. And he goes round her back garden, finds our koi carp pond, takes a look at them and sees that the fish are looking a bit sad, goes back home and tells everybody, these fish, they got, I don't know,
Dropsy.
Fin rot or whatever, and I'm gonna rescue them. And he tries to tell the woman about it. She's not interested. She just wants to get rid of him. So he convinces Sarah to do a bit of a heist, to go and take some water from the pond, pH test it, I think it was, and find out just what terrible situation these koi carp are living in. This story went on for 2-3 weeks. This was it. So there's a scene where they're kind of got dark glasses and baseball caps on, looking over the fence.
Yeah.
Like the neighbour from Home Improvement, scuttling over there. Then a neighbour... And then they go back another time in the middle of the night to actually rescue these fish, store them in his skip. And the woman's neighbour comes and says, Gerald, there's neighbours in the garden. Quick, phone the police. He gets arrested. He goes to trial, all because he's stolen somebody's fish. It's a little bit like... what was it that we were watching? Brassic. They have a similar... It's not a million miles away from the story in that early episode of Brassic.
They stole that idea from Coronation Street. They went, this summer of comedy that nobody liked is the perfect place to poach stories from.
Exactly. So this day of his trial comes. He's got this long, boring speech that he's preparing to try and defend why he thought it was a good idea to steal these women's fish. The trial comes and the judge or the magistrate is just like, I don't get paid enough for this. Do magistrates get paid? I can't remember.
I don't think you do, because I looked into it and I was like, well...
Oh yeah, you did, didn't you?
I'm not going to bother
and she's like, I can't... He says, I did it for the fish. And she says, I did it for the fish. Sounds like your epitaph. So she's, again, one of these characters that's, hey, everybody, let's just roll our eyes at how pathetic Scooter is. And one thing that was kind of funny from it was then Gail is Scooter's character witness, even though Gail is incredibly exasperated of him and Sarah having him as a boyfriend. And the magistrate's like, well, hang on a minute, aren't you Gail Hillman? Didn't you marry a serial killer? Well, your skills of judgment I call into question. And yeah,
it's
that was
personal.
And then he kind of gets, I think, does he get community service? I can't remember, but I did kind of enjoy watching it, like I said, because it felt sort of new. But I 100% get how this and some of these other storylines, the first time you watch them, they didn't have that vintage charm. Sorry, classic charm that they have for me now. Or did you say this was the modern era? I can't remember.
Modern.
It was
modern.
It was... This is what we've got for Corrie. We have got this for months. And aside from what's going on with Shelley and Charlie, everything else is just kind of silly. Well, a little bit like this.
One of the things I think I saw in your notes that is a reason why people don't like this era is that it feels like if you took it out, nothing would change. Like, if you took out the story where there's a font of all youth in Audrey's garden that turns out to be a sewage pipe, it wouldn't really make any difference. If you took out the character of Scooter McCuna, it wouldn't make any difference.
Yeah.
And so, from that perspective, it does feel a bit like there is a missing link somewhere. I mean, the Shelley and Charlie storyline was an ongoing one, but the fact that it does feel like there were some dark ones missing.
Yeah, I think there must have been.
Interesting.
Keeping on the theme of other characters that were dull, and that was the joke, you had Keith Appleyard.
You can't have, can I just say, you can't have more than one person at a time whose the joke is that they're boring.
Corrie managed it, so they tried to manage it.
You can, but it doesn't work out well.
So Keith Appleyard was Angela Harris's dad, who kind of swans in after Tommy gets...
He's the snowbird.
Huh?
He's the white-haired man.
Yeah.
He's has to look after Craig.
Craig, yeah, exactly.
And
he's
the joke
very
is
old-fashioned.
That he's an old stick in the mud.
He's a
Craig's
codger.
a young goth.
Yes, exactly.
He's going through the most emo thing possible. I mean, honestly, Craig should have been thrilled when his family died and his mum went to prison, because that's the most emo goth thing I can think of.
He wasn't like comedy codger like Percy Sugden, or he wasn't gossipy codger like Norris. He was just totally
boring old git.
He really was a boring old fart, and in some ways that was the joke.
Trying his best.
He did. He was into his gardening. He was a taxidermist. So I think that was the joke. He found taxidermy really interesting, and that's kind of a comedy profession, really, isn't it? Sorry,
great.
Taxidermists that are listening.
Didn't Craig think this was brilliant?
No, I don't think so.
What? He's not a proper goth then, is he?
It did lead way to...
Sorry, but taxidermy is fascinating. How can you be a boring taxidermist? What are you making it into taxidermy? What's the most boring animal? Tell you what, a hedgehog. Because honestly, there's nothing interesting about the shape of a hedgehog when it's dead.
What, when it's flat on the road?
Well, I mean, what are you doing with that? You can't make it into funny poses, can you? Like with a rabbit or a mouse or something cool like a parrot or like there. A heroic looking, like a triumphant. There's no triumphant pose for a hedgehog to be in, is there?
It's either standing there or roll into a ball.
It's rolling in a ball or just being I'm just chilling.
Well, the taxidermy element of his character. I suppose the other thing, he's also been, I'll go back to that in a minute. He's also been dating Audrey for a little bit recently, and he's been...
Surprised he didn't die to taxidermy her.
I know, she's still going, isn't she? He's been taking her out to dinner, but he's wanted to get the early bird special, so... And then there was one story where...
Thrifty.
He's thrifty.
Well, that's
he's
not
dull,
creepy.
he's thrifty, he's a taxidermist. But the taxidermy bit did lead to the beginning of a kind of funny storyline for Sean, and... I'm going to go on record and say I have enjoyed the Sean stuff over this summer, but I've always been a bit of a Sean fan anyway.
Yeah.
And this was early Sean. I think I can't remember that it was 2002, 2003 he first appeared. Or maybe it was 2004 even. But this is certainly feeling like his first big year. And he's everywhere. To me, that's not much of a problem. But I get that he's not the most popular of characters. Although, looking on the Digital Spy forums, there were quite a few people there saying at the time... Oh, Sean's a breath of fresh air, actually. Sean's the only thing that's actually been funny about it. And I think that maybe the joke's just worn thin of that Sean is an outrageously camp knicker stitcher from number 11. Whereas I still enjoy that part of him. So
maybe it's because at the time there wasn't a great deal of representation, certainly not on Coronation Street.
Oh, no.
And really, honestly, Sean is still the only camp gay man in Corrie.
Yeah, he's
always
enough.
Has been.
Don't need any more.
There's never been anyone else. There's never been another camp rival, has there?
I don't think so. If there was, it must be something only very temporary.
Yeah, so
he's the storyline for him with how he was linked to Keith and his taxidermy is that Sean goes round to number 6 one time.
I'm really intrigued as to how this is going to work.
He goes round to number 6 one time and he said, I just realised I owed Angela £20 or something. She's in prison now. Can you take it? And Keith was like, oh, no, you take it. And Sean feels bad.
Right.
And then Keith's going through, he's just got his boot open outside the front of the house and he's got this taxiderm. Is that the word? Well, Sean said...
Taxidermied.
Sean said stuffed. Of course, Keith, the stick at the bum guy he is, told us the correct term of mounted. Although Sean also later describes it as part of the storyline as intestinally challenged, which was quite funny. Sean sees this and he's like, well, tell you what, I'll buy this stuffed cat off of you and you can have the £20. And Keith goes along with this.
Cat.
And then I found this utterly hilarious, but maybe it's just because I'm a cat person and I find cut things funny. Sean takes it along to number 11 and tricks Jason into thinking it's a real cat. And it was so brilliantly performed by all of them. There's a couple of scenes where the cat's there sitting on the armchair. Violet, who is fairly new for this year, she was the highest appearing character in 2005. Eileen and Sean are sitting there in the lounge, desperately trying not to laugh as Jason comes in and is like, what are you doing? I'm allergic to cats. Why have you got me this?
What's the pose of this cat?
Just curled up asleep.
Okay.
And they're like, oh, maybe you won't be allergic to this one, it's fine. And then he's kind of like, and then they kind of tempt him over there to give it a stroke. And just Sue Cleaver, Jenny Platt, absolutely brilliant. Just trying not to laugh at this. And then Jason's like, oh, it's dead. And it was really funny. And then they repeat the joke in the factory, and it's still kind of funny there. Sean takes this cat in a box and tells all the factory girls, oh, I've got a cat, it's just asleep at the moment. And it basically plays out again with Sally getting tricked by it that time. I found that quite funny. But what that then leads to is... I think before the reveal that it's actually stuffed, I think Fizz maybe calls a vet, and the vet comes along, and this is Tim the vet, exactly, who's a bit of a charmer that Sean falls for, and then over the course of the summer he has various reasons for going to the vets because he's trying to work out whether Tim's gay or not. So he takes, I think he takes Schmeichel at some point. He takes poor Betty's cat Marmaduke, who ends up getting put to sleep because of something being wrong with it. That was a brilliant scene. Betty Driver, absolutely perfect. When we saw with Evelyn just last year when Cerberus was put down. She knocked it out of the park with that performance. Betty Driver, absolutely brilliant, just going to the vet and kind of lifting up the cover when she was allowed some time with Marmaduke. Fantastic. But yeah, I've enjoyed the Sean story. He even tries to get a dog off of the kennels because Kirk and Maria have got kennels at this point, haven't they? And it's a dog called Buster, but he's already told Tim, having found that Tim is a dog fan, that he's got his own dog called Bella Sinead. And so he borrows this dog called Buster, takes it to the Red Wreck and is going, Bella Sinead, Bella Sinead. And then the dog gets run off the lead, runs and escapes. And it's all a bit of a farce, but I really did quite enjoy that. But again, to me, it felt completely fresh because that story had been 100% wiped from my mind.
Okay.
And again, I get how at the time, if it was wall to wall this and this is what you've got, if that's not what you're into, you're not going to enjoy it.
So we got a couple of quite a few fairly nothing characters you mentioned. We got Diggory Compton, we got Jessie and Joanne Jackson, we got Keith Appleyard, we got Scooter McCuna.
You had even like Lena Thistlewood, who was this.
She sounds like a Harry Potter character.
Exactly. You can tell from her name that she's been brought in as a bit of a comedy character. She had 13 episodes in all. She comes in. She's a friend of Blanche's. She's kind of a randy OAP who fancies Ken. That's the joke with her there. And I think, because there had been another character that had been a friend of Blanche's and had moved in the previous year, and I've got a feeling, because she fancied Ken as well, that this Lena was created to replace this other character because this other one just stopped appearing. And then here's my new friend Lena.
The other one?
I can't remember what she was called even. Okay. Blanche's, here's my new friend Lena, and she fancies Ken as well. But she was the one. Do you remember the scene where I can't remember, it was during some wedding or something. She comes into the garage and Tyrone and Maria are at it in the garage office. Do you remember that? And she's like, oh my gosh, I need a brandy. And she kind of cons them into giving her a free MOT and a brandy because she saw them romping away in the garage office. That was kind of the extent of that character. There's a bit of a funny scene where another comedy storyline. Is it a comedy storyline? I don't know. It wouldn't be these days, but Blanche needs a hip replacement. But back then, that was a comedy story, especially because she needed to go to Poland for it.
A Polish hip.
And yeah, exactly. And there's a story where she and Lena are on a laptop at the lounge of Number One, looking up. I can't remember what, but they end up finding pole dancers online, basically. I can't remember what the Google search term is, but it's something to do with poles, and they get pole dancers, and that was kind of funny. But again, that character just felt 100% superfluous. You had who else is there? Yana. I have got a lot more fondness for Yana, honestly, but I think I enjoyed the Yana and Cilla team up. But looking at the forums at the time, they didn't go down well at all. People were fed up. That was kind of encapsulated the whole "this is too OTT." You got her sung bed. You got her working in the chippy with I can't remember what her co-worker was called. The very Chinese guy the joke was they didn't understand each other because he didn't speak English. And I don't know whether something like that would fly these days, but I kind of found it kind of funny. And there was one story where, when Blanche gets a hip replacement, she comes back and she's got a mobility scooter. Cilla ends up driving away and goes on a robbing spree on a mobility scooter and ends up driving it into the canal. You know, it was fine on its own, but not along with everything else.
But Cilla was in the show for a long time before.
She'd been in for a few years before then, so she wasn't brought in just for this. Oh, gosh, I can't remember. She had a good few years in her still after that.
So it wasn't like this was like, okay, it's not working then, we're going to have to get rid of her as well. Because...
No, but they did bring in Yana to give her a bit of a double act. And I think it worked. Yana, everything that ever went wrong, it went wrong to Cilla. So
she's like the straight man.
Yeah, straight man in a way, but she was also, she was kind of even slaggier. She was, that she had the lipstick, the long blonde hair. She had the fishnet tights. Or maybe I'm just describing Liz McDonald here, but she was a rough tart, I'm gonna say, for Yana. But she just seemed to stand back and watch as all the all the comedic disasters were happening to Cilla, I think it worked quite well. Just having Yana there with a fagging around while Cilla was fuming about whatever stupid thing that Les had done. So, yeah, for that bit, I have found them really quite funny. But not everybody has. The other story that we just had recently with them was because Les and Cilla are trying to get married, save up to get married so that they can get a load of presents, he goes to the police station and pretends that he's lost an engagement ring, and then he claims one and says, oh yeah, that's my engagement ring, and the officers clearly knows that it's not Les's. Cilla comes in and they all get involved. I've kind of enjoyed it. I think that's been kind of funny. What else have we had?
You've got Lloyd down here as somebody who was...
Yes, Lloyd he came in spring 2005, so he was somewhat established before this, and I'm going to say that he's a character that worked. He lasted the course. He was in the show for a decade, which is the same as Les Battersby. He was only in it for a decade, but I always think of Les, being as a bit of more of a classic long-termer, but I think he was in more of a golden era than Lloyd was. Hiring a comedian to play a character, that is obviously another bit of evidence that Corrie wanted to go more down that route. But the thing is, because he was a comedian rather than just an actor who was asked to muck about and be silly, he was really good. And he was great at the sarcasm. He was obviously clever. He just starting to see the great relationship build up between him and Steve. So I've got no problem with Lloyd. I think he's absolutely cracking, and I'm looking forward to seeing the next 10 years play out over the next 5 or 6 on classic Coronation Street. Sally's been good. She's still there's been not that she came out of this affair storyline with Ian, and she's now back into mum mode again. So, which I think is where she's best. I think that she's been fun with Tim, for sure, but I absolutely adored her being the pushy stage mum. And there was a couple of episodes stint where Rosie decides she's a vegetarian, and Sally does the whole thing of, no, you will eat this pork chop, and if you don't eat it now, you can have it for breakfast, and if you don't have it for breakfast, you're having it for tomorrow tea. It was absolutely dreadful, but really, really funny the way they played it.
He's such a bitch.
She totally is. But actually, what I've really grown to appreciate recently is Sally and Sophie, Sophie's inclusion. So she's now into Brooke Vincent Sophie, and I'd kind of forgotten just what a gem of a character young Sophie was, because she was ultimate Saki character, and she could see that Rosie was going to school at Oak Hill with her boater and her blazer, and she was very much like the David of the Websters, just offering these wry observations about what's going on, and Sally would be there being all kind of posh and prim, and Sophie and Kevin, I suppose, would just be like rolling their eyes and grinning behind Sally's back at just how awful and pushy she'd be. We also with Sophie had the knit storyline recently where Sally's saying, oh, they only go to a clean scalp, and Sophie's there just going, well, whatever, and then Janice ends up catching the knits off as Sophie gets her hair shaved off for the laughs, I suppose. They must have been getting desperate by the end of that summer when they were like to Vicky Entwistle, is that okay if we shave all your hair off for a funny storyline? But fair play to her, she did it.
So Sally had become a comedic character.
Sally was definitely a comedic character at this point. Yeah, she was. Okay. She was in full on snob mode here, and because I know she's not a comedian, but she is, obviously it goes without saying, brilliant at that type of Sally, that delivery. Yeah. So just as good as she is now, when you got your scenes with her and Tim, or her and Demi earlier this year, her and kind of brown-nosing Carla, she had that in spades there. So that's been great, but I'm not going to say that she has been a main character in the summer, and maybe if they'd leaned more into pushing Sally towards the fore, it could have been more successful. But then it still would have just been more comedy and not the drama.
So what are the kind of comedy stories then? Because we've got
you've got Scooter and the Fish. That was the long-term one. But most of the others weren't long-term ones. They were just short, episode.
What was this
or
about
week
Rita
fillers.
then? Rita being dead.
Well, that was that again. That was it hasn't turned into anything else yet.
Okay.
But she was dead but thought she was dead for an episode, and that was it. There was another kind of 2-episode arc where Norris, I think inspired by Mel Hutchwright, decides to write his own novel, and this was actually quite funny. He's Rita and Emily get a hold of a copy of this early manuscript that he's writing, and he kind of like, leave it alone, it's mine, and I'll show you when it's finished. And then they still keep snooping on it and find that he's writing about this character called Norris. And there's other characters in this story called Amelia and Reba.
Oh, I get it. I see.
You see where he's going with this, and they're kind of having these sneaky looks where they can, and then they're horrified to discover that in the story, Norris can't decide who he wants to propose to, Amelia or Reba.
Right,
so they're like, oh my gosh, he's going to propose to us. And then he ends up proposing. I can't remember who he proposes to in the end. I think it's Emily.
In the book?
No, in real life.
Okay.
I think he proposes to Emily.
Yeah.
Or is it Rita now? I can't remember.
Well,
but anyway, they accept, and the punchline of this all is, this is all a load of rubbish, because he knew that he was reading their book, and it was very much playing a very long con here, that he actually decided to write chapters of his book just to trick them into thinking that he wanted to propose to them, and it was to teach them a lesson to keep their noses out of his business. I know. Frida's been in it this summer as well, which has been quite good, and I've always loved Frida, and she's just brilliant here. And seeing, it's funny knowing that Norris ends up marrying Frida, because they're definitely butting heads early on, and he's doing the old can you hear what I am saying now?
Oh
and
my God.
Even though she's like a perfectly good lip reader, and she's like, is there something wrong with your brain? I love Frida, so I've appreciated that.
What's this about Roy's invention?
That this was, get another filler. This was Roy finding that one of his relatives had died and left him the blueprints to an invention that he was doing, which would convert the kinetic energy from a door opening into power. And so he decides to run up this little Meccano model of it, and then converts it into an actual model that was used in the cafe, so that whenever customers came into the cafe, it would make a kettle boil. And it was okay.
What happened?
Well, nothing. In the end, somebody comes along and buys the patent off of him, and he's somebody who works for a chain of hotels or owns a chain of hotels, and that's the end of that. But it had a couple of funny scenes, and Vera kind of diligently noting in every customer that came into the factory, and Roy shouting at people, close the door on your way out. But again, nothing more than filler. But if you look on the cafe wall now, the diagram for it is still up there.
Oh, that's
fans.
Funny.
Yeah. So that was okay for a week. I think that the story that I probably enjoyed the most is another one that is maligned by some people, which is the Ashley boxing storyline.
Yes, yeah.
And I think it really is the strength of the characters in this, particularly Fred, John Savardant, and Ashley's. They were just great. I think we all know how it ends, that Ashley ends up in a boxing match with this Mad Dog Maddox, and everybody in the audience starts fighting at each other. Like, Claire gets into an argument with this blonde bimbo that's got a wig on, and she pulls her wig off, and the girl stands on Claire's glasses. Meanwhile, you got Lloyd, who accidentally insults this big bald tattooed guy in the audience, I think it is. Sally's trying to get somebody to sit down in front of her because she can't see, and the whole audience kind of erupt into this massive rumble. And it was, fair play. They had good 100 people in that scene. You wouldn't get that these days.
No.
But that worked well, because it was kind of peppered throughout the summer. You had, I appreciated the casting of the Maddoxes, these rival butchers, because you got, I think Eddie Maddox is the dad, and he's very much like Fred. He's this kind of this big portly bold guy, and then you got Mad Dog Maddox. I can't remember what the son's name was called, Marvin, and he's got the silly voice like Ashley. It was literally like a copy and paste version of Fred and Ashley, changed a little bit, and he kind of he riles Ashley up by insulting Claire and saying how ugly she is, and Ashley, who originally didn't want to fight because he is a bit of a pacifist, gets really into this. It was kind of fun, and I think because I knew it would lead to the big boxing scene, I kind of went along with it. I'd forgotten that one thing that Marvin did was speak in rhyme a lot of the time. So you know how you got your sting like a butterfly, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You had him going up to Ashley doing all these taunting rhymes. This tiny little bloke with a silly squeaky voice trying to be all hard. I found it funny.
Well, it's right up your alley, isn't it?
It's right. That was right up my alley. So I think out of all of these kind of big-ish comedy storylines, that was there. As I pretty much remembered how it happened. I very much enjoyed watching it again. That was probably the highlight of the summer of comedy for me.
What other big comedic storylines were there then? Were there any other big ones you haven't covered yet?
Not really. I mean, there's Bob, who's a character that's brought in to be a boyfriend for Liz, Bob, exactly. Who's he?
Okay.
He was there for a month or so. I basically tuned out whenever he came on, but the punchline at the end of that was that Liz is invited along to his studio because he's a photographer, and he tries to strap a saddle to her back and get her to pose in a kinky horse outfit, and she's like, screw that for a game of soldiers, not doing that. And then we got, what else was there? There was Vera and Jack
and the dogs.
Kirk and the dogs. He and Maria inherit the kennels from their parents when they go off to Cyprus, and then there's just scenes of looking after dogs, and isn't that funny? There was a scene with Kirk in the bath with a dog at one point, but not much went on there. Kirk was still funny at that point.
Vera
and Jack, I was saying that they had a fallout because Vera reads that the more you argue in a couple, the longer life you have. So Jack purposefully winds her up, and then it ends up with her leaving him, and then he has to go and get her back from Blackpool or something. It's just all very much. I think if there had been a few of them amongst normal storylines, it would have been fine. So this is all totally get how altogether it was a bit of a dud.
Placed over the course of like three months.
Yeah, everything that we've talked about, apart from those ones that we said before, like the Mel Hutch, right, was over 3 months, and there wasn't much else.
And the other big story was Charlie and
Shelley.
Shelley.
You also had a bit
really dark.
Yeah, that was a bit, and it wasn't there all the time. You also had a bit with Danny Baldwin having a secret affair with Leanne, who was supposed to be going out with Danny's son Jamie at the time. That's not particularly been interesting to me. I'm kind of glad that it's over, but I am also wary knowing that it doesn't necessarily hit the highs of the very early 2000s again for a little while. I mean, years like 2010, I think I'm right in saying were pretty great, because that was when they had the Cham crash at the end of it. But there was some. But then it also was the year of the Molly and Kevin affair that year. So I'm a bit just a little bit trepidatious, thinking that classic Coronation Street watching, which I have very much enjoyed over the past few years, is going to start to turn into we're into the bit of the dull era. But it is still an era that, because it was not so great at the time, I have forgotten a lot about, so maybe it's going to feel nice and fresh for me.
What happened with Tracy and Steve?
In
this summer?
That was just... I said there earlier they were trying to get custody of Amy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I said that one.
She wants to get engaged.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Do you think that the comedy in this short summer was objectively any worse than they do now?
In some ways it was better.
Right.
Because there are some characters now that when it's like a Mary story, or when it's even a Brian story sometimes, or a Kirk story, or even sometimes a George story, I'm a bit, here we go again. But I didn't think that was the case back then.
They've got some really, really talented actors playing all these parts. I really highly rate almost everyone who's a comedic character in Coronation Street. But I just don't think, I don't know what it is, but the writing, do they not have enough time to rehearse it? Does it take a long time?
I think we're into the no rehearsals era, even on the classic.
Is there no spontaneity built into the schedule because they just don't have time? So therefore, there are going to be less comedy bits. Like, because a lot of the time you can write what you want, but it might fall flat. And then the thing is, I think maybe in the old days, if a joke fell flat when you performed it, you'd come up with something else. But what do you do now? Nothing. You can't do anything about it. You just hope that somebody laughs at home.
The comedy in Coronation Street these days, maybe it doesn't mostly revolve around this, but this is how I think of it, is that you have to be as over the top as possible, or just say something that makes you look thick. Because that's what's happened with Gail.
Yeah.
That's starting
really
to happen with Deirdre.
Well.
It's such low-hanging fruit.
Really low effort, to write. And I don't like to really slag the writers off because I think that they do as well as they can. You know, I think the writing's really good on Coronation Street, and some of the, you know, the best writers in telly write for Coronation Street, but they bloody can't seem to do comedic stuff that well anymore because, like you said, it is all just the lowest common denominator. You know, I'm just going to rely on poor Patty Claire, to just enunciate everything and make broad sweeping gestures as she says this to make it sound funny, or like have Kirk come out and say, I don't know what boxer shorts are, and then it turns out he thinks you're talking about shorts in boxes. You know, I can imagine them doing that. Like, what? Kirk used to be funny because the jokes were clever, and he wasn't clever.
Yeah.
And now it's just like, oh, Kirk doesn't know what a spider web is. For some inexplicable reason. Yeah.
I think that, I mean, it's no surprise that Evelyn these days still gets the nominations and the awards for comedy. And I think that she genuinely is the best that they've got in Corrie at the moment for comedy.
Number one, she is an incredibly skilled actress. Number two, she has got years of experience. Number three, whatever she says goes. I can't imagine anyone arguing with her if she said, I've got a better idea for this.
Yeah.
And number four, sad to say, most of her comedy is just her facial expressions and reactions and the way she delivers the line, not the lines themselves. I don't think you need to write anything funny for Evelyn to make you laugh in a scene.
She's a master of the withering put down as well.
Well, yeah. She has got, look,
she's not quite Dowager Countess, I'm not going to say that there's on her way.
Never anything funny written in Coronation Street, because it does make me laugh. And I think there are some funny bits, but I think that if you're going to compare the comedy now to any time in Coronation Street, and like I said before, I do genuinely think that back in the day, Coronation Street characters were wittier and funnier, and they had better banter.
I think, a good number of the performers back in the very early, if we're going back into the vintage stage at the moment, they kind of grew up being comedians or doing the stage.
Well, they were performers. They were theatrical
variety artists. So you got Bill Waddington, for example,
and a lot of them were performed during the war when. You were trying to make people laugh who were going through the worst period of their lives, and you probably didn't have a lot of support and a lot of help, or maybe you're writing your own stuff or whatever. Yeah. And so I think that they had a bit more experience in selling a joke. Yeah.
A lot of it is how you sell it. So anyway, that's kind of like my review and recap of the last few months of Coronation Street.
So what do you say? What's your overall?
My overall is that I was going into it ready to be completely disappointed and knowing that it was a much maligned era of Coronation Street, and I came out of it the other side mostly thinking that's not too bad really. I was kind of interested because so much of it I'd forgotten. But I understand how at the time people probably didn't enjoy it, and it did very much feel like Corrie spinning its wheels until I guess the autumn stories came in. There were some real highs. I enjoyed the boxing match. I enjoyed Sally Webster. I definitely do like the team up of Yana and Cilla. But yeah, if I was at the time watching it and thought, how long has Diggory Compton? How long we got to put up with him? Yeah. How long we got to put up with Scooter McCuna? How long, I would Keith Appleyard, is he supposed to be the new Percy Sugden because he's not doing it for me? I would be worried at the time thinking it, but it wasn't too bad. It was an interesting era. I'd give it maybe a 6 out of 10.
Okay. Yeah, it wasn't the worst thing in the world.
Yeah. Out of all of this that we've been talking about today, are there any stories out of them where you thought, I kind of think I would like to watch that story. Or I wish it's a bit sad I missed that. Maybe I'd want to catch that up on YouTube.
You haven't really sold any of it to me, but maybe I'd quite like to see if anyone's made like a video compilation of like Scooter McCuna's story, because I still don't really get what the point was.
It was so weird, and it really did dominate some of the episodes for a good few weeks.
The thing about having a boring, weird boyfriend is they did that with Felix in Summer, and
yes,
it worked.
he was like Felix.
He was funny, and because he was in like 2 episodes.
But this is like if Felix had become the main character for a little while. It was like that, and then the joke goes.
Yeah.
But there's only a few months we got left to Scooter now anyway, and then he scoots off into the sunset. I would kind of be interested to see him come back. When I was googling around this weekend, I saw there was an article that the Sun put out. It might have just been earlier this year actually, about what's so and so up to now who played him, and he's very much like a silver fox kind of character.
Really?
Yeah, he's gone grey.
I imagine Sarah would quite like that if he's rich.
It's a bit like, we've got Jessie coming back and reuniting. Well, not reuniting.
People would moan about
with
it.
Gail after all these years. But maybe, Sarah has had a string of awful boyfriends. She showed she cannot be trusted with men. She always chooses either the criminals or the sleaze bags. Scooter, bless him, was a bit inoffensive, but at least he treated Sarah well. At least he tried his best when he was giving her these gifts that he found in the skip. And maybe just a little bit of stability is what Sarah would need. So
don't curse this poor man.
What?
Making anyone into Sarah's boyfriend if they're a normal person is like...
Is that the kiss of death, is it?
Yeah, causing them great distress in a sad, unhappy life.
Well, there we go. I think we're done. I think I've said all I need to say about this.
What did you think of the Summer of Comedy?
I'm assuming
2005.
that a good number of people watching this have also been watching it recently. Did you agree, disagree? Is there anything that I enjoyed that you hated, or vice versa? Anything that I've not... See, the thing with this is I didn't go into watching this thinking I'm going to take any notes at all. The normal podcast episodes, we're making notes and thinking all the time, how are we going to talk about this? But this, I'm just kind of looking back on it now and saying, what do I remember? So any of the individual witty lines of dialogue, most of them have gone into the... It's
interesting to imagine whether or not it felt worse or better because it was so condensed.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well, actually, because I watched it or listened to it or half and half over the course of a month and a half. But this did
if
it.
You were trudging
3
through
months
it
of
for
it.
3 months, and you're like, "What is the other side of this?"
Yeah,
we've just
not
come
knowing.
from like some super dramatic stuff, and especially like Mad Maya and
Mad Maya was brilliant,
and the
the
whether
Katy
or not
story,
you
the Hillman.
you thought the Katy stuff and the Hillman stuff was too dark for Corrie. And the people who say that are normally the ones who really want the comedy and light-hearted stuff. And you got served this on a platter, you would probably lose hope, wouldn't you? Thinking, I didn't want this. This isn't what I asked for.
It was a not like this. Yeah. It was a not like this.
It was a switch in Matrix.
Yeah. Right, let's go. Let's finish for today. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you for telling me, Michael, about all the secrets.
I don't know how well this worked, of just me telling you things and then you saying, what about that character? But I thank you for your contributions anyway. Because you did ask me some good questions as well. But listeners, if you would be interested in more of this kind of thing, where we talk about ITV3 Classic Coronation Street, but it's mostly me just talking and Gemma going, let us know. Gemma's not going to start watching Classic Coronation Street. There's only so much that I can force feed her Corrie on a daily basis.
I'm watching vintage and current.
We are watching some vintage Coronation Street, as we know.
We're watching bits and bobs that we can salvage. I feel like Scooter McCuna going in the skip, seeing what I can dig out, some treasures from YouTube, because there are some good ones on there. Obviously, you've got the DVD ones as well. So I'm salvaging what I can.
Yeah, but it is a time commitment. Although it's better for me now. What I'll find in the morning is, in the time it takes me to have a shower, have a shave, clean my teeth, come out, sort the dishwasher out, get dressed and get ready to go to school, I can pretty much fit 2 episodes in there. because we don't have the ad version of ITVX anymore.
Excellent.
Didn't have no way with all the ads beforehand, so I'm pretty much able to keep up. But I can imagine that there's lots of people who've got quite the backlog of ITV3 episodes because they come in at quite a pace. 10 episodes a week, that is a lot.
Yeah, has anyone skipped these episodes more so than you might have normally?
I'm not just saying that they belong in a skip with Scooter.
Well, yeah, but I know sometimes on our Facebook page, I'll see someone saying, I can't get on with this storyline. I'm just not watching episodes at the moment, so I'll start watching it again later. Or if I see this scene, I'll fast forward it. Which the freedom, I'm so envious. But if you're that kind of person who's like a fair weather watcher, fair weatherfield watcher, have you been more of a skipper? This summer.
Let us know. Tell us your feedback.
Yeah, go on, tell us.
Or if you want more of this kind of thing.
Are you fed up with people maligning it? Tell us.
That's it.
No thought too deep or shallow for us in our little world of Coronation Street. Email us conversationstreet@gmail.com and we will see you at the weekend for our regular scheduled episode.
We will. Goodbye.